So this week we're going to be talking about a bunch of things that have to do with what customers have been experiencing in the past few weeks. So there's this issue with virtual card payments, right? Customers in Nigeria, all over Nigeria, are having issues paying for stuff, like things as little as Udemy courses. I think the only thing I can pay with my bank app right now is Google Drive,
Google One.
Yeah, and I find it weird that that's the only thing you can pay with. Google is not missing out on any of the payments. It's fine. But YouTube Premium and all those other awesome stuff, well, yeah, but we saw an article on TechCrunch. Union54 CEO Perseus Mlambo talked about the experience with the whole chargeback fraud thing. Now, he mentioned chargeback fraud. What does chargeback fraud actually mean? So, give us the context about Union54. Why are they important to do this whole paying with dollars thing? Then, what was the fraud thing that happened?
Okay, so the startups that give you your virtual dollar cards, or in some cases actual dollar cards, they need like a third party to provide this service. So the person just gives them access to the API, and then they can now generate it. So the third party basically does the heavy lifting for them on the back end, and then they are able to maybe at the click of a button issue you a virtual dollar card. So Union54 was a YC backed company, and they were doing this for a lot of the Nigerian startups that were doing it. And sometime last year we heard that they were backing up that service.
Are they Nigerian?
No, they are not. They are not.
Zambia, right?
Yeah, I think Zambian.
Yeah, okay.
So, well, at least the founder is Zambian.
Zambian.
So they packed up and they decided that they were going to pause that service for a while until they figure out. And there was a hint that, okay, the problem from this is, it wasn't like a technical issue. It was more from they were having a lot of fraud. So you asked what chargeback fraud is. So if you make a payment and that payment fails, you can request, like when you try to send money to me and it doesn't go through, and then your bank reports or they reverse that transaction, that's a chargeback. So the fraud there is now when I didn't make a payment and then I go to my bank and I say, oh, I made a payment from Onome, and then the bank now has to refund me. And it's a big deal because businesses, yes, so they won't go to the person who they made the transaction to. That's why you're not hearing maybe a Jumia telling that they have chargeback fraud right now. So they're not going to the person.
You said you didn't make any transaction.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's why it's fraudulent.
Yeah, but when, for instance, if I want to reach out to my bank for a failed transaction, they ask for the transaction ID.
Yeah.
So how does that fraud work without that transaction ID?
So the technical details are, it's not there isn't like a lot of technical details. So it's just me starting a claims process for a transaction that never happened.
But why would they answer me when I can't prove that I did a transaction?
Well, they won't come to the Union54, for example. They are coming to maybe the banking partners that they are working with, because Union54 won't hold funds. So let's say you make a payment through a third party fintech, and normally you're going to dispute with your bank because a lot of the fraud or maybe a lot of the issues would come from your financial institution, not really from the service provider.
Which is why, so you said Union54 will not hold funds, right?
Yeah.
So let's say I went to withdraw from an ATM. So I'm trying to use relatable example.
Yeah, okay. So what will now happen is, when this happens, the bank will refund the money, but they will come back to the person who was issuing the card.
So MasterCard or Visa, for instance.
And tell you, okay, chief, you're owing us X amount of money in chargebacks. Now, it's now a case of you going ahead to pay. You probably will have to pay them. In short, you definitely have to pay them. But the problem is that, actually it's a big deal for a lot of startups, not just in Nigeria. And he mentioned it in that interview that startups across the world suffer from that. I can't remember the exact figures, but about $79 billion or so is lost to chargeback fraud annually. So that's huge for any business. And yeah, that was the major reason. So something he mentioned is that the problem wasn't coming from them. It was coming from the fintech startups they were protecting. Serving. So these guys did not have a very, very good way of finding out that they were being defrauded. So when that happens, it's now either they are passing the cost on to Union54. So basically, it was a lot of hassle. And the thing is, he mentioned that they had to decline transactions like to safeguard themselves because they will have to pay. So they had to decline a lot of transactions. And as they were doing it, he mentioned that Netflix and a lot of other people who customers were trying to use these cards to pay for services, were now calling them to find out why they were declining a lot of transactions. So it's not good for them as a business, but continuing the service, as he mentioned, would mean they will spend their money to pay back these frauds. I think he said in a very short while they racked up to $500,000 in chargeback fraud.
Wow.
And if they had continued, this is I think 8 or 9 months since they stopped that service. If they had continued, they would have incurred more. And I think they raised maybe was it 5 million or so. So if you did $500,000 in such a short period, I wonder how long before you finish all the money
that you raised.
Okay.
So my question is, if the fraud, is it coming from customers?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's coming from customers. So people that say they made a transaction and they claim the transaction did not happen. I mean, they claim the transaction failed, but no transaction actually happened in the first place. Which was why I was asking, should there usually transaction ID to identify? There's always a record, right? Yeah. If a transaction fails or if it did not. So are they formulating transaction IDs?
Well,
don't exist?
It's not like it's casual people that are doing this. I mean,
fair point.
If I don't have some level of maybe technical skill, I probably will not be engaging in chargeback fraud. But it's not like, and it's also not, so the way we have like content farms that people are farming out or like just creating content, you could also have people who this is their own, this is like their own specialty, ensuring that they defraud companies like this. And he mentioned that there was a particular startup that they found out that there were too many transactions being done. And then they reached out to them to say, oh, there are too many transactions being done on your end. What's happening? And then those guys said, I mean, it's normal. It's part of growth.
It's growth.
A few hours later, they reached out to me like, you guys are right too. There's something wrong somewhere. So, I mean, you may see that there's a lot of transactions on your end, and then it's not actual transactions. So, they are just people trying to defraud you. So, one thing he mentioned is I think we had an interview with, what's the guy again? Esige.
Yeah.
And he talked about how fraud is a big deal in Nigerian, especially Nigerian fintech. And you always hear on Twitter people say, hug a fintech founder. And that's because these are like existential, how do you put it? Like these are problems that you will definitely face. Whether it's someone trying to defraud you or maybe your service not working or something. So,
the thing is, okay, I almost tweeted this or put it on my LinkedIn yesterday when I was in traffic. Well, the issue is, I'm usually angry when I'm in traffic. So, I mean, the last time
everybody is.
No, the last time I posted something controversial on social media, it was in traffic. So,
you enter traffic.
But yeah, what I'm thinking, I mean, everybody's saying hug a fintech founder. I don't know why I don't pity them sometimes. Why? Okay, I know why I don't pity them sometimes. I mean, what they're doing is really hard. It's really difficult. Yeah. But if you're interviewing these guys, you're always hearing, we don't have competitors, we're collaborators. The sky is big enough for everybody to build. Then how come a fraudster uses the same technique to defraud company A, then rinse it, and it doesn't even use hypo to rinse it, it doesn't dip inside water, then drops it inside company B. And then company A and company B, who are collaborators and who the sky is big enough for everybody to flourish, don't talk to each other.
Well, I mean, I think it's obvious now that in reality, nobody is collaborating. Okay, well, not nobody.
No, few of them are collaborating.
Not all of them. I think the collaboration is more on paper than in practice, because it would have been easy for you to say, oh, something like this happened, watch out for it, and then the next person is like able to take precautions before time. But I think it could be that, okay, yes, their job is difficult. I mean, everybody's job is difficult. Their job is difficult. But one of the reasons why I don't pity them a lot is that banks have been running financial services for decades, and yes, there was no social media and all for us to hype them up, but they've not been complaining and saying, "Oh,
They have the money to cover up their
fraud has been
losses.
happening though.
Yeah, of course it has been.
And
it has been
but
happening.
I think for
Yeah.
banks, a lot of it is insider jobs.
Yeah. And then the fact that something happens and you try to cover it, which is something else that is curious. I mean, he mentioned that one of the reasons they didn't speak after that happened, like immediately after it happened, was that they were trying to weigh the possible effects. So if we speak, we may have to mention the startup that was involved. And if we mention the startup that is involved, what effect does it have on that startup's business? Which makes sense. If they are maybe the kind of startup that, I don't know, maybe they hold money and people will feel, oh, maybe we should go pull out our money because yes, it's a very, very touchy topic. But that makes me wonder, how many things do we have to not talk about because of the supposed effect on the ecosystem?
Damage.
So maybe this is not the right place to be talking about it on the podcast, and I'm sorry, listeners, but something clicked in my head a few days ago, and I realized that okay, the startups, the reason why most of these guys actually caught foreign media. So if, for instance, Union54 CEO wanted to make amends with customers, where is he going to go to have this kind of interview? If he wants to make amends with investors, where is he going to go to have this kind of interview? I'm not going to say anything more than that. But for the case of, say, hey, nobody is going to talk because of how it's going to affect the ecosystem, it's a very, very tricky subject. And you have to realize that, okay, the more these companies grow, the more even we media companies also grow, right? Tech Point growing in prominence, Tech About growing in prominence, all are a direct reflection of the ecosystem that's also growing alongside. The same thing can be said about TechCrunch. If the Silicon Valley US tech ecosystem wasn't as big, maybe TechCrunch wouldn't be as big. Same thing with Sifted, Europe, or Tech in Asia, all these other platforms. So I get the argument, right? But as journalists, we need to find a balance, right?
Oh, yeah, it's not even from the media. I mean, of course, the media doesn't.
The media is the one that is doing the talking, isn't it?
No. Yeah, well, we start conversations in some cases.
Talk.
Yeah, but when people always say those lines that it's going to hurt the ecosystem, I feel that you're just trying to like hide the real. Like you don't want accountability.
Like the founder of Two Unicorns said, if it's better we don't tell the story.
Yeah, and you know what's funny is that for so long we went on crying about how we need to tell the African story.
It's fine.
And then when we started telling the African story, it now changed to, we need to tell the nice parts of the African story. And here's the thing: it's not just founders that do it. I've seen a few people who say that they are telling stories, that the stories in Africa are not just wars, political instability, but these are our stories. If we are being realistic, these are our stories. And Chimamanda talked about the danger of a single story,
right?
We can't make the same mistake that the Western media made, where they focus on only the bad side. And then because we are trying to balance things up, it's one of the reasons why we don't have like very, very good accounts of our history. So in the early days, we were trying to dispute the fact that we are not the dark continent. And in doing that, a lot of our history was told around our exploits. We never ever talked about all the bad things that happened in Africa, because they happened. We are human beings. And then all of a sudden, we now, maybe 70 years later, we're now looking at how to tell a complete history. So in order for us to get this complete story, I think it's important that, yes, we tell the good stories, but we also tell the bad or not so good stories.
Yeah.